Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Falls for Konoha's Most Hated Girl Sakura Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. I see what you mean, the freak. She's got pink hair. I hate people who want to get attention this badly. I heard she's a nerd as well. Look at that forehead. She might as well be the hunchback of the Notre Dame. Sakura squeezed her eyes shut. If all those people would just go away. She opened her locker, quickly shoved the books she needed for the next class into her bag and then closed her locker again. As she stiffly made her way to the classroom, the rumoring and pointing continued. It wasn't like she was not used to the rumors and the fact that she was looking down upon. She didn't get why it was, really. It could be because her hair was naturally pink, not an usual color. It could also be because she got the highest grades in school, but she did not see the logic. Why would people hate someone just because that person is intelligent? If somebody has a talent, shouldn't others be happy for them? As Sakura made her way to her seat, she mentally cursed. She was seated in the back of the class, and to get to her seat she had to pass Uzumaki Naruto, Uchiha Sasuke and Yamanaka Ino. The three of them were the most popular students on Konoha High, and the people that hated her the very most. She took a deep breath and tried walking as quickly as possible, but, before she knew it, a foot was stuck between her legs, causing her to trip. She let out a small shriek and fell down on the floor, knees first. When she slowly looked up, the first thing she noticed was Ino's smug expression. My. I'm sorry, Sakura. I really didn't see you. Even though Sakura did not believe Ino for a second, she muttered, "It's okay." She did not want to make things worse. When she got up, a hand grabbed her shoulder. She tried shaking it off, but the grip on her shoulder didn't loosen. When she looked up, she noticed the person the hand belonged to was no one else than Uzumaki Naruto. "I didn't hear you. I said that it's okay," Sakura replied in a low voice. "Really? Because I think you should be the one to apologize. You were the one that bumped into her leg in the first place." "He's right, you know. Apologize." Billboard brow. Ino threw in. "But I didn't do a thing." Sakura stuttered. Oh, how she wanted to cry. But she would not allow them to see her pain. She had to stay strong. "Apologize. Apologize. Apologize." The class quickly followed. As she looked around for help, her gaze lingered on Sasuke. She had had a crush on him since elementary school. And even though he just sat there, with a smirk on his face and an expression that said, just the view of him almost entranced her. "Apologize. Apologize. Apologize. Apollo." The class chimed, only to be cut off by the teacher that entered the classroom. Kakashi opened the door and walked straight to his desk, without looking up from the book he was reading for a second. "If anyone would like to spend this afternoon in my office instead of with their friends, please continue whatever you are doing. The rest, open up your textbooks on page 68. Sakura, sit down please." Sakura tried to ignore her classmates, muffled giggling, as she rushed to the back of the class. Sakura. Sakura looked up. Hinata, one of her classmates, had turned in her seat, so she was now facing Sakura. "Are you hurt?" the black-haired girl asked her, fidgeting her thumbs. It was a mean thing they did. "I'm fine, Hinata." "Really?" Sakura replied. I okay. Hinata said, turning around again. The boy that sat next to her, Kiba, shot her a questioning look. Sakura knew that Hinata, no matter how nice she was, didn't want to get too close to Sakura for she might be bullied as well. Sakura didn't blame her, she was probably right. When the bell rang to announce the start of the lunch break, Sakura was the last to leave the classroom. She walked straight up to her locker, and decided she would spend this break outside. The weather was beautiful today. And noticing it was spring, the temperature wasn't half bad either. As she walked out of the door, she was greeted by a fresh breeze and the faint scent of flowers. She first passed a group of people that always used the schoolyard to smoke, and then a group of girls that started to giggle as soon as they caught sight of Sakura. She had learned to ignore people like them, so she walked on. As soon as she turned around a corner and was about to sit down by the fountain, she noticed Naruto, Sasuke, Ino and a few more people whose names she didn't know sitting on a few benches that were shaded by trees. Not wanting to get into trouble, she settled herself against one of the oak trees that were planted all over the schoolyard. When she sat down, she noticed how perfect this place was for a person like her. She was hidden from everybody's view by bushes that were planted around the tree, but she could hear everyone just fine. About halfway through the lunch break, Sakura's attention was caught by the conversation Ino, Naruto and Sasuke and their friends were having. "You were great at the football game last Friday, Sasuke," purred one of the girls that was sitting with them. "And today we're gonna play even better." Naruto yelled a bit too loudly. He was probably annoyed because of the attention Sasuke got. Sakura rolled her eyes. Naruto and Sasuke were the two star players of the Wolves, Konoha High's football team. Sasuke was very talented, but Naruto had been training for years until he was finally allowed to enter the team. He was pretty good right now, though. Sakura took a bite from her slice of bread. Sakura usually not watched during the games, since she was never really interested in the sport. Nor did she look forward to watching all of the students that bullied her the very most showing off on the field. Suddenly, the pink-haired girl stopped chewing. She noticed the group had quieted down. Just as she was about to leave her little hiding spot, the bushes that were hiding Sakura from the rest of the students' view were pushed aside roughly. Sakura's head snapped up from her lunch. There stood Ino. Well, Sakura. Eavesdropping, aren't we?" "No, I was just eating," Sakura retorted. "As if you'd speak the truth," the blonde said, running a hand through her hair. I don't eavesdrop," the rosette said, getting up so quickly that she had to hold on to the tree so she wouldn't fall. "Well, seems like you need to be taught a lesson," Ino said, snatching Sakura's carton of milk out of her grip. Before the pink-haired girl could protest, the blonde tore open the carton and emptied it above her head. Sakura let out a scream. All she could do was stand powerlessly as the white liquid wet her hair and slowly dripped down her chin and into her shirt. Ino just opened her mouth to make another comment, when she was interrupted by somebody. Well, Barbie. Making another person's life miserable again." Sakura and Ino simultaneously turned their heads towards the person the voice belonged to. It was a red-haired girl that looked about a year or two older than them. She had piercing red eyes and was quite tall, giving her an intimidating look. Sakura recognized her as one of the people that were always smoking during the breaks. "No one asked you anything, Karen," Ino muttered through clenched teeth, squeezing the carton she was holding so tightly that the remains of the milk streamed out. "That's the fun thing about being me, I don't give a crap," she said. She popped a bubble of chewing gum between her teeth before continuing, "Now be a good Barbie and piss off." Ino grunted, dropped the remains of the carton on the grass and walked over to her friends, who had all stopped talking and were looking in her direction, shooting her puzzled looks. Sakura didn't notice her jaw had dropped until the girl named Karen said, "Close your mouth, girl. I swallowed a fly like that once." Sakura's sweat dropped and closed her mouth. "I'm sorry. I am just not used to somebody standing up for me." She then looked up at the redhead again. "Thank you." "It's no problem. You're Sakura, right?" The pink-haired girl nodded. "You shouldn't let people like her push you around like that, you know," Karen said, offering Sakura a piece of paper. The rosette accepted it, and attempted to dab her clothes dry with it. "There are too many of them. I couldn't. Look, Pinky, if you get bored of always being bullied, you can always join my friends and me in the breaks." Sakura didn't mind Karen's harsh words, she was obviously nice, just a bit tough. "Thank you," Sakura smiled. Before Karen could reply, though, the bell rung. Oh, crap, I'd better get to class, she muttered. Keep your pecker up, okay? Sakura nodded. Bye. As she hurried to class, Sakura felt warm inside. Had she actually made a friend? It must be the first time since elementary school. Back then, Sakura had many friends. Ino had been among them. Then, one day, she and Ino discovered they both shared feelings for Uchiha Sasuke. That must have been the moment they started despising each other. They then were rivals. In high school, Ino became surprisingly popular. She used her popularity to set everybody against Sakura. Soon, the poor girl was bullied by every person in her school. Among them was Naruto. Back in elementary school, he had a crush on Sakura. She was always very mean to him, though. Blinded by her love for Sasuke, she pushed the poor boy aside. Then, in high school, he was popular as well. He no longer was the hyperactive, little brat he had been. He now was taller than Sakura, and was no longer cheeky to his teachers. He and Sasuke were best friends now, instead of rivals. Altogether, it was payback time for Sakura. And boy, they got her. She had, unlike her friends, changed negatively. Since she didn't have any friends anyway, she thought there was no need to talk much like she had when she was younger. She also no longer was rude, unkind, or made jokes. She felt it would only make matters worse. Her once long, pink hair was cut off so it barely reached her shoulders, and she had become even more skinny than she already was. Her emerald eyes had become dim with loneliness. Now, when she got home, all she did was study. She had nobody to talk to, and became depressed. Her parents didn't know what was wrong, so they pretended nothing was. Many parents do that, you know. Because, if they don't make decision, they can't make a wrong one either. The bell rung. The students all left the classroom chattering and laughing. They talked about their plans for the weekend. Sakura got up slowly from her desk. During math class, she had not paid attention, but instead let her mind drift away. She loved doing that, looking at clouds through the window, and pretending those clouds were her. She could almost feel the wind carrying her, a million feet above everybody and everything she despised so much. They would all look up at her, wondering how come they recognized her from somewhere, and what it would be like to float in the sky. As Sakura exited the school, she could hear the faint sounds of cheering from the football field. The whole schoolyard was deserted, aside from a paper bag that whirled over the tiles, carried by the warm spring breeze. She closed her eyes to the bright sunlight. Oh, how she loved sunshine. It was so warming and gave everything a familiar and friendly feel. Sakura looked around for her bicycle, but then remembered how she had found it 2 days ago, all scratched and beaten up. Her front wheel had been gone, and the rest had been so battered that she had to bring it to the dump. She had been walking from and to school ever since. She sighed and looked up at the sun again. Even when all other things looked hopeless, there were single things that you could depend on. Like the fact that there will always be people who like you, and people who don't. Like there will always be life, no matter in what form. Like the fact that the sun will always rise again, even when you're not there to see it. Yes, all Sakura had to do, was base herself on certainties. There would be no risks. Sakura panted. She kept her eyes on the road underneath her feet, watching tile after tile appear and disappear in and out of her line of vision. She was jogging. It was a Friday evening, and the sun had just begun to set. It was dinner time, so the town had quieted down. All Sakura heard was the blowing of the wind and the tapping noise that her running shoes made as they collided with the pavement. She loved jogging. She loved every second of it. When she jogged, she just chose a place to run to and took off. Nobody bullied her when she was running. She had time to think about all kinds of things, life, death, her dreams, and just thought. When she had closed the kitchen door behind her, she noticed the setting sun from the corners of her eyes and just started running towards it. Everywhere she looked were things that normally didn't stand out. Things like street lanterns, stone benches, and waste bins. In the light of the sun, though, They were mesmerizing. They were colored a bright orange, and seemed to sparkle and shine in the light. Sakura smiled. Maybe, one day, something like that would happen to her. She would no longer be the boring, ugly waste bin. She would shine. She would shine brightly. So bright, that when people looked at her, they would cry from the deepest of their hearts. All she needed to accomplish that, was a son. About half an hour later, Sakura returned to her house. She looked up at the now dark sky for one last time, before opening up the kitchen door and going inside. She instantly covered her ears. Her parents were shouting at each other. You don't give a shit whether Sakura and me are happy or not. Our daughter is obviously suffering from depression and I don't know why, and all you do is work. That was her mother. If you come home, you are always drunk. Her mother continued, get out of the house. Get out. She could now see them. They were in the hallway. Her mother was pointing one finger at her husband accusingly. He was walking backwards, looking quite unimpressed. He was obviously drunk. Her dad now stood with his back against the front door. Sakura took a few steps in the direction of the hallway, wondering whether to do something or not. You're the crazy one. It was hard to understand her father's drunken mumbling, but he was talking loudly. You should be getting out of the house. I'm the one who's paying the bills. What bills? What damn bills? You haven't been going to your work for a week. I was called by your boss today. You are fired. We are completely broke, Phil. We're broke. Her mother hung her head. Sakura's dad mumbled something that sounded like, you know what? I had with Anne last night, and guess what? Her father licked his lips. She was better than you. Then her mother's head snapped up. That's it. Get out of the house. When her father didn't show any signs of wanting to leave, the woman opened the door and pushed him out. Go die, you asshole. She shouted at him. As he turned around to walk down the small stone steps, he tripped and managed to catch himself just in time. Sakura's mother slammed the door shut behind her husband. For a second, she looked like she didn't care, but the opposite was proved as the red-haired woman started shivering and then collapsed on the floor. She buried her face in her hands and started crying. Sakura was not sure what to do. She wasn't good with crying people. She never cried. Having watched the previous scene, she was ready to puke. But she did not shed a tear. Sakura bit her lip as she walked up to her mom and helped her up. Come, Mom. It's all right. Everything will be okay. The pinkett shushed her sobbing mother. She half dragged, half carried the red-haired woman into the kitchen and helped her sit down on one of the kitchen chairs. She then turned on the water boiler and grabbed a glass teacup and a tea bag. As she looked at her mother over her shoulder, she sighed, dropped the tea bag in the cup and then filled it with boiling hot water. Sakura's parents fought often lately. They had once been a loving and happy family, but slowly but surely things started falling apart. The love in their family crumbed down slowly, one piece at a time, until all that was left was an uncertain future and piles of debts and unpaid bills. Her dad had become an alcoholic and started dating other women. He thought his wife didn't know anything about it, but she did. She just knew that, when she confronted him with it, that would mean that everything was truly over. Of course, it already was over. Every hint of happiness had disappeared from their family a long time ago. But when you don't stop believing, you can make everything seem like there still is hope. A chance on luck. A better life. ... Even when the conscious part of you tells you you're being silly. Here, Mom, Sakura said, putting down the cup of tea on the table and shoving it in her mother's direction. The woman had put her arms down on the table and rested her head on them. Even though Sakura wasn't able to see her mother's face, the slight shocking of her shoulders revealed the fact that she was still crying. The pink-haired teen understood that she wouldn't be able to help anymore, and walked up the stairs and into her room. She instantly walked up to her bed and fell down on it, without even kicking her shoes off. Everything'll be all right soon. I just know it, was the last thing that crossed her mind before she fell into a deep, dreamless slumber. As Sakura feared, her father did not come back. In fact, She didn't know if he was even alive. She had asked a few of his friends whether they knew where he was, and they had all replied that he had taken Maria, the girl whom he had cheated on her mother with, and just left. They just rode off to the sunset, one of the middle-aged men had told her, shrugging his shoulders. Sakura had thanked them and gone home. It was obvious that her mother wasn't able to take a job right now. She still broke down crying now and then. Just a few memories, she would answer Sakura, when she asked what was wrong. All she did was sit on her favorite armchair, and watch TV. At least, that was what it looked like. If Sakura looked close enough, she could see her mother's attention wasn't on the TV screen, but at the window behind it. As if she still expected her husband to come back. Haruno. Snap out of it. Someone barked into her right ear. Sakura's head snapped up, and she looked into the faces of two elderly women. One of them was holding a carton of milk out to her. She had spaced out on the spot. When Sakura looked to her right, she saw a middle-aged man standing next to her, with crossed arms. He was tapping his foot on the linoleum floor impatiently. "I'm sorry, Mr. Stevens," the pinkett told him. Her boss was a balding man who always wore a knotted tie that was secured a little too tightly, as well as a smug expression. She was working as a cashier to gain some extra money to help her mother out in the time she wasn't able to, but he wasn't making the job easy for her. "If I see you space out one more time, I'll be sure to fire you, missy." Sakura nodded at the man, and took the carton of milk from the old lady, muttering an apology to her as well. To her surprise, as soon as Mr. Stevens was out of sight, the lady winked and whispered, "I feel bad for you, girlie. You have to deal with that man every day." Sakura moved the carton of milk through the laser that read the barcode, showing her the price that needed to be paid for the product. To her own surprise, Sakura couldn't suppress a smile. "I'll be okay. That's $1.50, please." The woman handed the girl the money, and took a hold of the plastic bag that held her milk. "Hurry up, Chio," her friend shouted, tugging the said woman's sleeve. Sakura chuckled as she watched the women leave the supermarket through the automatic sliding doors, giggling like high school girls. She hoped she would be like that when she was their age. At around 10:30, the supermarket was closed. The rest of the employees had already left, but Sakura was ordered to clean up the spilled products in the clearances, and turn off the lights. Oh, how she hated her job. The building gave her the creeps, especially at night. There were shadows everywhere, and one could never be sure whether the shadow belonged to a pile of boxes or a murderous rapist. She tried decreasing her fright by humming a tune. It was the only tune she knew inside out. Her mother used to sing it to her when she had trouble falling asleep. Sakura sighed at the memory. After she finally finished cleaning, Sakura locked up the store. She once again made the mistake to search for her own bike among the other forgotten ones that were standing by the exit, leaning against the stone walls of the building. She sighed and took in the street. The sky was pitch black, causing the street to be dark as well. It was also totally empty, and full of Sakura's so very beloved shadows. The girl shivered and started walking the route to her house stiffly, trying to make as little noise as possible. When she was about halfway, she thought she heard footsteps, aside from her own. She clutched her white bag in her hands and started walking faster. She timidly looked behind her, and could just make out somebody's silhouette. Her eyes widened as the person passed a street lantern, becoming visible to her for a few seconds. It was a man that looked about 30 years old, and wore a dirty, dark green hoodie with the words, "No, I'm not on fucking Facebook," on it. Sakura gulped. This man looked like a classical example of one of the people her mom had meant when she told her daughter not to talk to strangers. What could she do? Sakura overthought her options. She could either run away and risk the chance on him catching up with her, she could scream and risk the chance on the man following her not being a creep and a penalty for breach of peace, or she could take a shortcut to her home, so she would be home sooner and had a big chance of shaking the man off. The third option seemed the best one, so she turned around a nearby corner, into an alleyway. She knew for a fact that it led to an enormous maze of alleys that led to every location in town. She also knew she shouldn't come here, especially at night, but she had a bigger chance of returning to her house healthy this way. She had to duck and slalom her way through the small street, since it was littered with waste bins, old carton boxes, garbage and refuse bags. To her own abomination, she noticed that the iron fence at the end of the alley wasn't open like it was during the day, but closed. A big, rusty chain lock prevented it from being opened. She looked over her shoulder swiftly, and when she noticed the man was coming closer steadily, she started shaking the fence panic-stricken. But even though it made loud clanging and creaking noises, it didn't move an inch. She made a desperate jump for the top of the fence, and to her own surprise, she made it. Sakura was now hanging from the fence. She took a deep breath, moved her arm over it and pulled herself up. The pink-haired girl let out a small shriek as a hand closed around her ankle, and for one single, panicky moment she thought she was going to fall down, at the mercy of the man. He would be able to do whatever he wanted with her. But fortunately, her momentary loss of balance caused her to fall forward. The weight was too much for the man that was attempting to pull her down, so his grip on her foot loosened and Sakura landed on a pile of moist carton boxes. The fall wasn't completely painless, but she didn't even feel it. All she knew was that she needed to get away from the man that was staring at her through the fence, with cold, merciless eyes and a grin that was filled with teeth that were a yellowish brown. There were some missing occasionally. A shiver went down Sakura's spine, before she remembered she had to get out of this place, stood up and ran as fast as her skinny legs could carry her. Luckily, running was one of the things she was good at. A wave of relief washed over her as she noticed a large amount of light coming from the end of the alley, she knew, led to a street that was only 1 block away from her house. She slowed down a bit, realizing this street wasn't empty. There were cars driving to and from. She let out a sigh she didn't know she had been holding in, realizing she was finally safe. The girl closed her eyes as she almost reached the end of the alleyway, expecting to soon enter the street. Oh, how she longed for the bright, enlightened billboards and the crowd that was treading on the pavement. You can imagine how surprised she was when a hand grabbed her by the throat, pulled her back and slammed her against the wall. Naruto yawned audibly. Man, he was tired. He knew he shouldn't have accepted Ino's and Sasuke's offer to go to the newly opened club tonight, but it had all seemed amazing. Not that it hadn't been fun or anything, though. It had been cool. Going out is just not as much fun when your eyelids are drooping and you can't think straight. Now, for example, he could swear he saw a billboard brow walking in an alleyway on the opposite side of the street. Naruto stopped walking. Wait, billboard brow. He narrowed his eyes, trying to get a better view of the girl, but his vision was blurred. Maybe those 6 beers had not been such a good idea. Huh, was his mind playing tricks on him, or was there really a man walking behind her? For some reason, she was smiling, and her eyelids were closed. Should he help her? Wait, of course he should. She might be a freak, but she was still a human being. He waited a few minutes for a chance to cross the street, but then decided those cars formed a non-stopping line. When he looked at the alleyway where he saw Sakura, he noticed she was now gone, as well as the man that had been walking behind her. That alarmed him. It wasn't possible she had exited the alleyway and walked all the way out of this street in such a short time. Let's try it the New York way, the blonde thought with a smirk, before crossing the street. He didn't look to the left or right, nor did dodge the cars that rode towards him. He didn't even flinch when a car halted with shrieking tires, almost knocking the boy off of his feet. This way wasn't the most careful or the smartest one, but neither of these abilities were one of his good qualities, so he ignored it and kept walking carelessly, pretending not to take notice of the angry drivers and the things they were shouting at him. When he reached the sidewalk, he didn't hesitate, but made straight for the alleyway. Sakura gasped as the man slammed her against the wall. She felt as if all of the air was knocked out of her lungs. Why hello there, little girl, he whispered, what are you doing in a place like this all by yourself? Sakura frowned at the smell of his breath. It smelled like rotten eggs and something else she couldn't quite place. Please let me go, she hissed. She tried keeping her face clear from any expression like she did normally, but it was hard when she was scared like she was right now. I'm afraid I can't, the man replied, don't worry. This won't hurt. He grimaced, and tried zipping down her vest. Sakura's eyes widened. She tried kicking the man, but he only chuckled and tightened his grip on her neck. He was strangling her. Single quote. See can't breathe. She managed to whisper. Don't worry, little girl. This will all be over soon, was the only reply she got. She tried looking at the street, to see if somebody could help her, but found they were hidden from everybody's sight by a huge, iron garbage can. She squeezed her eyes shut. Just as she was about to lose hope, the hand that had been strangling her left her neck. Arg. Sakura gasped, filling her lungs with the fresh night air. When she opened up her eyes, she noticed somebody had pulled the man off of her. That person now slammed him against the wall and punched him in the jaw 4 times before releasing him. The man didn't fight back, but instead seemed to realize that his attacker was much stronger and left the alleyway, running like crazy. Both Sakura and her rescuer were panting from exertion and tension. She couldn't see her rescuer's face, for he was wearing a hood and didn't face her, but was determined to thank him. Sir. She started, still panting a bit. The person turned his face in her direction, but she still couldn't make out more than his hood. Thank you very much, the pink-haired teen continued, fidgeting the strings from her vest nervously. I should give this person something, anything, she thought. But she did not have any time to think, as her rescuer turned around, muttered something that sounded like, it's okay, and left the alleyway. She thought she recognized his voice from somewhere, but dismissed it. After all, she didn't know any people that would help her if she were in danger. A few days later, during lunch break, Sakura sat in the canteen. It was raining outside, so the whole room was stuffed with chattering and eating students. She hated the canteen. It was an unnecessary big room that looked very plain because of the colors that were picked for decorating it. Mainly white and gray. The only source of light came from some circular lamps that hung from the ceiling, for the clouds were blocking the sun from everybody's view, and the floor consisted of white tiles. The only furniture consisted of long, iron tables that were placed all over the room. They were hardly noticeable now, though, as they were littered with students. Some were sitting on the tables, some were reading on the long iron benches, and hell, some were even lying on them. Each and every one of them looked content and happy. Sakura, though, was sitting on the very end of one of the tables, as far away from the rest of the students as she could manage without falling off of the bench she was sitting on. Her head was hanging and her pose was hunched up. Every person that didn't know her would think she had just been dumped, or something shallow like that. In truth, she hoped this way she wouldn't attract attention. She tried focusing her attention on her lunch, a simple sandwich, like always. When Sakura finished her meal, she opened her bag and searched it for her English homework. She had forgotten to do it at home. In fact, she never did her homework. She usually did it during the breaks. She sighed and searched her bag for a pen. Suddenly, she noticed the bag was pulled out of her grasp. She slowly looked up from underneath the pink bangs that were covering her face, afraid of who she would find standing there. And right she was, for there stood Naruto. Hey there, forehead, he said, curling the left corner of his mouth up in a toothy smirk. Please give me back my bag, Sakura said, not reacting on the nickname she was given by the blonde. Dunno, he said, tapping his chin, maybe I should look inside first. Who knows, you might just keep some drugs in there or something. Another guy, Shikamaru Nara, walked up to Naruto and Sakura, so he was now standing next to his friend. He had his hands in his pockets, and wore an extremely bored expression. Give me my bag, Sakura hissed. She was getting mad now. Naruto ignored her comment and opened her white bag, digging in it with his hands. Forehead. Where's all the exiting stuff? I thought girls always brought interesting things to school. Sakura was about to try grasping for her bag, when Naruto started smirking. Hey, Nara, look at this, he said, holding up a small book with a red, fabric cover. It's a diary. Sakura thought she was going to puke. Give me. See, can I please? March 22nd th. Dear Diary, today was a normal day, I went to school and such. Naruto raised his voice, ignoring Sakura's pleas. I saw Sasuke, though. Every time I glance at him, I feel like my heart is going on a rampage. Sakura put her hands over her mouth, as the other students slowly started snickering. They didn't try muffling their snickers, either. Soon Sakura's ears were filled with roaring laughter. I can't describe it, it's such an unearthly feeling, I can't believe I'm feeling like this. It's impossible. He's so cool and popular and beautiful, and I'm. Slap. Everybody fell silent, as a loud, smacking noise echoed through the canteen. Naruto just stood there, with widened eyes. He didn't even move his hand to the cheek where Sakura had just punched him. Sakura hadn't moved either. Her fist was still held out in front of her. The only thing that had changed was her expression, which had gone from anger, to shock, to fear. She lowered her fist, grabbed her diary and her bag, and ran away with as much speed as she could muster. The students could only gape at the pink-haired girl as she ran through the canteen doors, and the soft tapping of her footsteps faded, leaving them behind with nothing but the sound of their own breathing. You could hear a pin drop in the canteen of Konoha High School. The silence lasted, even minutes after Sakura had stormed out of the canteen. It seemed like the whole scene had frozen on the spot. Even the sounds of the raindrops colliding with the thin roof and the windows had become silent. Then, slowly, a few students started whispering to each other. The whispering became louder and louder, until it was talking. The world seemed to start turning again. The awkwardness, though, lasted. Sakura Haruno has fought back against one of the popular students. What kind of crazy universe is this? Was what crossed most of the teens' minds. The two boys that stood in the middle of the canteen didn't move, until the raven-haired one of the two of them sighed and snapped his fingers in front of his friend's face. Hey, Naruto. Snap out of it. Naruto blinked a few times, and then looked around dully, taking in his surroundings. You okay? Shikamaru questioned. Yeah, I'm fine, Naruto replied. He didn't look fine, though. As the teens approached the table their friends were sitting on, they pretended not to notice the awkward glances the other students that were sitting in the canteen shot them. Hey there, you guys, Ino started awkwardly, taking notice of the stony features that were on Naruto's face at the moment. She knew him well enough to recognize his face's current expression. If he wore it, it was duck and hide for every person within a distance of 100 feet. Or more, if he was in a really, really bad mood. Every person that was sitting around the table gulped simultaneously. Shikamaru sat down next to his best friend Choji. They formed an odd duo, Shikamaru with his raven ponytail and permanent bored expression, and Choji being the chubbiest one in the group, often wearing cheerful smile that was only emphasized by his plump cheeks and brisk, dark brown eyes. Naruto sat down next to Ino, glaring at the iron surface of the table. Here, take a Coke, Kiba said, holding a can of Coca-Cola Zero out to Naruto, attempting to calm him down. Naruto accepted it. His friends all watched him suspiciously. Unfortunately, just when the blonde opened the can, Lee walked up to their table, and slapped Naruto on the back. So, got punched by a girl, And not just a girl, you got punched by Sakura Haruno. What a youthful story. Naruto, football player and one of the most popular students, got punched by Sakura, the school outcast. Lee was the head of the school paper, and, even though he was a nice guy, never rejected a good front-page story, not even when somebody could get hurt by it. Naruto knew very well that now the small part of the school that didn't just witness the scene live, would know about it. He narrowed his eyes. His friends looked down at the can that Naruto was holding. He was squeezing it so tightly that the brown liquid poured out of it through the hole in the top of the can. Lee, come over here. A high-pitched voice called out to the black-haired boy. Coming, Tenten. He yelled back at her. I shall see you later, my friends. The students that were sitting at the table nodded at the raven-haired boy as he made his way through the canteen, looking so upbeat that he seemed to dance. Naruto was silent for about 10 minutes, until the conversation his friends were having gained his attention. Sakura is getting arrogant, Ino remarked. She ran a hand through her platinum blonde hair before continuing, I've known her about my whole life. And I can tell you, when she's arrogant, you have to do something about it cause the bitch is crazy. I know that look, Shikamaru said, you've got a plan. The blonde licked her lips and then smirked, I've got a plan. Naruto arched an eyebrow, curious for what was coming next. After all, Ino was the queen of payback and making people suffer. Both physically and mentally. Sakura looked up at the clouds. Her eyes were narrowed to protect them from the sunlight. She was walking the streets in town. After the Pinkett had stormed out of the canteen earlier that day, she had made her way to the center of town. She had skipped out on the lessons that followed. She knew she had to go home soon, but did not let that thought bother her. The sun wouldn't set for at least 2 hours, and what did she have to return to? A mother that did nothing but stare out of the window. A pile of bills to pay. A dark, dusty room that she was to sleep in. Sakura frowned. She wasn't sure if she would go to school tomorrow. In fact, she wasn't sure if she would ever return to school. The other students were probably making plans to make her pay for what she did, namely punching the school's most popular student. Sakura covered her face with her hands. What had she done? She had lost control for just a second. Just one unfortunate second, and ruined everything. Naruto had just made her so angry. He had made fun of her feelings for Sasuke. The single thing that she was sure of, the single thing that she didn't have to share, the single thing that kept her standing. She knew it were just useless, unrequited feelings, but to the miserable girl they meant a lot. After all, the good thing about not having much is that you learn to treasure everything you do have. Later that afternoon, when the first hints of orange appeared in the sky among the soft blue, Sakura decided she should head home. She walked the main street until she caught sight of her street. By the time Sakura reached her house, the sky was pitch black and the air had cooled down so much that she had to hug her arms around herself to keep warm. She opened up the kitchen door and reluctantly entered her house. As she expected, the house was as dark as the sky above. She didn't bother turning the lights on as she removed her shoes and her vest and walked towards the hallway. On the way to the stairs, she passed the door that led to the living room and spotted her mom, sitting on her favorite armchair, underneath her favorite painting. The painting showed a vulture sitting on a treetop. Vultures were the animals she hated the most. They were hateful creatures. They took advantage of others' misery. They fed on rotten bodies and lost hope. Sakura tore her gaze away from the painting and directed it on the woman sitting on the chair. The light coming from the moon outside stroking the left side of her body made it visible that her head was resting on her shoulder and her eyes were closed. The blanket that was normally covering her had slipped off, so it was now lying on the floor. Sakura picked it up and softly covered her mother's legs with it. "Good night, Mom," she whispered as she closed the curtains and left the room, trying to make as little noise as possible. The next day Sakura was woken up by the loud beeping of her alarm clock, and the sunlight creeping in through her window. Reluctantly, she got out of bed and took a short shower. She decided she would go to school today. After all, not going would just be postponing her fate. In the end, she would have to return to school anyway. But she just felt as if she was not ready enough. She had no idea how the other students would treat her after yesterday, or whether she would survive to begin with. Sakura closed her eyes and allowed the warm water to soak her hair and her body. After about 2 minutes, she unwillingly turned off the shower. She never showered very long, that way she saved money that would otherwise be spent on a bill. The teen pulled on a red hoodie, some jeans and worn-out all-stars that had once been pink, but were now colored a grayish beige, and walked down the stairs. When she got downstairs, the first thing she did was opening up the curtains in the living room, earning a disapproving grunt from her mother and opening up the back door so the fresh wind could spread the delicious scent of spring through the dusty house. Sakura gasped as a furry, white thing brushed past her leg, before realizing that it was just her cat. Primrose, Sakura sighed, "You scared me." The cat turned its head in her direction, taking in the teenage girl with its big, yellow eyes, before yelping a high-pitched, meow, and dashing off to one of Sakura's beloved flower beds. During summer, she spent entire weekends caring for the daisies, pansies, roses, daffodils, tulips, sunflowers, lilies, magnolias, poppies and her favorite flowers, primroses. The flower she had named her cat after. Oh, how she loved her garden. In the last 16 years she had managed to change it from a dump into a paradise. There were white, ivy-grown, stone walls surrounding the whole place. There was a mosaic terrace in the middle of the sea of colorful flowers, underneath an arc of ivy. There were bunches of grapes dangling from it, like cheerful decorations, and there was a small river streaming right through the garden, giving the whole place a mysterious but also very lively feel. Parts of the river were overshadowed by lush trees with pink flowers, cherry trees. The sun shone on it from sunrise to sunset, so the entire day the garden was bathing in the sunlight. Also, the many colors and overwhelming odors coming from the flowers attracted butterflies, ladybugs, bees and wasps. Sakura didn't mind them, they did no harm to the plants or to herself, if she just let them be. Which she did. Sakura's eyes flicked over to the cherry trees again. She adored those trees. Not only did they have the most beautiful blossoms and the most delicious scent, Sakura was also named after them. After all, Sakura meant cherry blossom. She listened to the sounds coming from outside, the noises from the nearby highway, the clattering from the river and the cheerful chirping of the birds, before remembering that she had to eat some breakfast. She would need the energy for the bullying that she would have to endure in the course of the day. She walked towards the kitchen, where she made tea and a sandwich, which she ate hastily, while stuffing her bag with the books that were needed for today's classes. As Sakura entered the school grounds, she instinctively squeezed her eyes shut, not knowing what to expect. Maybe complete silence, or groups of students that lunged themselves at her. For some reason, she got neither. The petite teen slowly opened her emerald eyes, scanning the schoolyard for anything that was out of the ordinary. She found nothing. As usual, the place was littered with groups of chattering and laughing students. Here and there stood oak trees, proudly swaying their leaves in the wind, and some bicycles, in and around the stands. Sakura took a big gulp of air and gave her white shoulder bag a nervous squeeze, before striding off towards the building. She looked around swiftly, still on her guard. In the third period, Sakura was still not made fun of. That fact made her suspicious. There was no way the students would let her get away with what she did. She looked around the classroom. Most of the students were dozing off. They were either fixing their gaze on the wall behind the teacher without actually seeing anything, or looking out of the window. The students that were concentrated, weren't concentrated on the teacher in front of the classroom, but on their cell phones. Sakura was the only one really paying attention. As always, the bell rung to announce the end of the period and the start of the lunch break. The teacher that was standing in front of the classroom waved his hand absent-mindedly, dismissing the class for the morning. Sakura walked up to the math teacher, instead of exiting the classroom with the rest of her classmates. Mr. Sarutobi, Sakura started, trying to gain the man's attention. What? The man yelled. He looked around swiftly until his gaze lingered on the pink-haired girl before him. He smiled, recognizing the straight-A student right away. It's amazing how a single smile can make a person look so much younger, Sakura thought. Can I help you, Sakura? Yes, I was wondering whether you could explain the ABC formula again. As Mr. Sarutobi explained the exact purpose of the math formula, Sakura just pretended to listen, and made sure to nod once in a while. In truth, she wasn't curious at all. She was reluctant to leave the classroom and the safety that the adult, unknowingly, offered. Does that answer your question? Mr. Sarutobi finished. Sakura's eyes flicked over to the man. What? Oh, right. It's all clear, thank you very much. Okay, then. If you have any other questions, please wait until tomorrow's class. I have a meeting I need to attend, the old man said, leaving in a hurry. Sakura sighed. There was no escaping her fate. She poked her head out of the classroom, searching the hallway for any signs of Naruto or his friends. When there was none, she rushed to her locker. Looking around swiftly, the pinkett opened up her locker, shoved the books she needed for the next period into her bag and hurried to the main exit, intending to spend the rest of break outside. She dove through the heavy doors, for once not noticing the nice weather and beautiful surroundings, but dashing off to one of her hiding places. She was stopped, though, by a hand that closed around her arm and pulled her closer. And for one panicky moment, she thought it was Naruto. Relief washed over her as she noticed the red hair and glasses that belonged to Karen. She had been smoking with her friends, when she noticed Sakura running through the doors. Why are you running so fast, girl? I just wanted to get some fresh air, Sakura said. It wasn't a lie, technically. Okay then, Karen said, dismissing the fright that was written all over Sakura's face when Karen had grabbed her arm seconds before. Hey, Karen, aren't you going to introduce us to your friend? Somebody called out to the redhead. Quiet, Suigetsu, she snapped, earning a low whisper that sounded like, whatever, 4 eyes, from the guy named Suigetsu. Karen turned her back to Sakura. Hey, you guys. Her friends turned their heads in the two girls' direction. Karen placed one hand on her hip, and used the other to point her thumb at the student behind her without casting her a glance. This is Sakura. Sakura brushed the bangs out of her face. Hi you guys. The group of people didn't answer. They looked from Sakura to Karen, wonder written all over their faces. She's okay, you bunch of big babies, Karen sighed. The guy that stood the closest to Karen and Sakura was the first to break the silence. Nice to meet you, he said, smiling. Sakura flinched. This guy looked just like Sasuke. Well, aside from the fact that he looked a few years older, and the marks underneath his eyes. I'm Itachi, the raven-haired guy continued. Oh, she remembered. She had once heard Naruto and Sasuke talking about Sasuke's big brother. They had said that his name was Itachi, and that he went to the same school they did. So was it possible that this guy was Sasuke's brother? Sakura could only gape at him. Luckily for her, Karen turned around and shot her a glance that said, say something, you douchebag. The pinkett restored herself, likewise. He nodded. These people are Kisame, Deidara, Hidan, Tobi, Konan, Kakuzu, Pain, Zetsu, Sasori, Jugo and Suigetsu. Every person from the group nodded. As Sakura took in the seniors, she couldn't help but think this was the strangest group of people that she had ever seen. All of them wore at least one thing that was black, looked like they would be able to kill her without ever feeling sorry, and already seemed to hate her guts. The girl gulped audibly. Sakura wasn't able to see Karen's face, but her stiff posture revealed the fact that she was annoyed. Come on, Sakura. Let's go somewhere else. But just as the girls were about to leave the group behind, they were startled by a voice coming from behind them, Miss Karen. Fuck, the redhead hissed. A teacher was running over to them. Sakura recognized him as Mr. Asuma. Am I mistaken, or is it true that you skipped out on the first 3 periods? Karen didn't answer, but instead hung her head. That's what I thought, Asuma said, taking his trademark cigarette out of his mouth. Come with me, young lady. Karen sighed in defeat, cast Sakura an apologetic glance and mouthed the words, "Watch it, Jazutsuigetsu," when he snickered, covering his mouth with his fist. Sakura guessed the nickname was based on the guy's weirdly pointed teeth. Sakura sighed. She smiled at the group of seniors before turning her back to them. She never knew how to act in front of people she knew didn't like her at all. As she walked away from Karen's friends, she caught sight of the large fountain that adorned the schoolyard. There was a stone statue in the middle of it, of what probably was Konoha High School's founder. It was a stern-looking man with a nose that was pretty big in proportion to the rest of his face, that was, for some reason, surrounded by fish and mermaids that spewed sparkling water. The artist must have been on crack, crossed Sakura's mind, as she took in the weird statue. She hadn't noticed she had spoken her thoughts aloud until she heard somebody's voice from right behind her. Yeah, probably. She spun around, only to see Naruto standing there. His bag was hanging around his shoulder carelessly, a can of Coke was in his left hand and he was using his right one to shade his eyes from the bright sunlight. He was studying the statue on top of the fountain closely. Sakura couldn't help but flinch and take a few steps back. Naruto tore his eyes away from the fountain, and directed it on the pink-haired girl. "I won't bite," he said, but then smirked and added, "Hard." Sakura knew he was joking, but she could barely suppress the urge to shrink away from him. When after a few minutes the pinkette still hadn't said anything, he realized she wasn't planning on answering him. "Look," he sighed, "I'm sorry." Sakura's jaw dropped. "You're what?" "I said I'm sorry. I went too far yesterday." Sakura could only gape at him. Why is he saying this? "Stop saying things you don't mean," she muttered. "I'm serious," Naruto replied, running a hand through his golden spikes. Sakura let a low chuckle escape her lips. "No, you aren't. You never apologize. I punched you. My life is supposed to be over now." He sat down on the stone wall that surrounded the fountain, resting his arm on his knee and his head, in turn, on his hand. He looked up at Sakura. She couldn't make out what kind of look there was in his blue eyes, whether it was hate, amusement, sadness, happiness. This boy was a mystery to her. Then his eyes flicked over to a place on the wall he was sitting on a few times. Sakura decided to keep standing and pretend she was stupid. When he didn't give up but kept flicking over his eyes to the wall, she gave in and sat down beside him. They were silent for a few minutes. "I know why you punched me, and I deserved it. I shouldn't have read your diary," Naruto said, leaning back with closed eyes, obviously enjoying the sunlight. "That's the worst thing that could happen to a girl, isn't it? To read her diary." Ino said so. Sakura couldn't suppress a soft chuckle. "It's not the very worst, but it's close." He was silent. Sakura didn't trust him. She doubted she ever would. Minutes passed without the two teens talking to each other. They just sat there, enjoying the sunlight on their skin and the soft breeze stroking their faces. Sakura kept shooting Naruto suspicious glances from the corners of her eyes. But Naruto pretended he didn't notice it. After a few minutes, they were startled by the loud ringing of the bell. Sakura looked around reluctantly, remembering she had history class from Mr. Iruka. She had history together with Naruto, too. "Want me to walk to class with you?" Naruto asked, getting up from the wall. Sakura didn't notice he was talking to her at first. What? "I asked you whether you want me to walk to class with you," the blonde repeated, rolling his eyes. "I'll be fine," Sakura stammered, not bothering to suppress the slight, concentrated narrowing of her eyes as she tried to figure out what Naruto's real intentions were. Because of course, he wasn't doing this out of kindness. He couldn't be. Could he? Sakura turned her back to the teen and started walking in the direction of the main building. "Don't be a baby, let me walk to class with you," he said, trying to keep up with the pink-haired girl. Sakura pursed her lips at Naruto's troublesomeness. She knew he could be annoying, loud and rude at times. But She also knew that when Naruto wanted something, he wasn't going to give up. She knew that, no matter what one tells him to do, in the end he would always listen to his heart. She had known him long enough to know everything about him that made him stand out from the rest. He had bad and good qualities, even if he didn't always show. That's what made him, well, Naruto. Come on, Sakura. It won't kill you, he nagged. Sakura rolled her eyes, realizing she wasn't going to win this. Fine. Walk to the stupid class with me. She didn't look at him, but she could feel he was smirking triumphantly. They entered the classroom, and to Sakura's astonishment none of the students looked up or started whispering and pointing at them. Naruto walked straight up to his friends. They all smiled cocky smiles at the blonde as he approached them, and they started laughing and talking loudly, as always. But, for some reason, as Sakura passed their seats, nobody tripped her. There were no drinks thrown at her. There were no rude comments. There was nothing. Barely believing it, she increased speed as she closed the distance between her and her seat. She threw down her bag and sat down quickly. She didn't trust all this. She didn't. She slowly peered up through her bangs, taking in the rest of her classmates. They were all acting normal. Shino had turned around in his seat, facing Kiba and Hinata. They were whispering to each other about some soccer game. Before them were Naruto, Sasuke, Ino and Shikamaru. Ino had stood up from her stool, and was now imitating somebody. She pointed her finger up the bridge of her nose, as if she was wearing glasses, and was hunched up, supporting her back with her other arm. From the looks of it, she was imitating the school's receptionist. Her friends were laughing at the imitation. On the seats in the middle of the class, were seated Lee, Neji and Tenten, that were discussing a movie from the sounds of it. Behind them sat Gaara, all by himself. He was reading a book and bobbing his head to the music that was coming from his iPod. The seat behind his was empty. And on the row of seats in the left row, sat Sai, in the back of the glass. Judging from the piece of paper on his table and the pencil in his hand, he was drawing. In front of his seat sat Takuya, turned around in her seat and admiring Sai's drawing. At least, that's what she wanted him to think she was doing. In truth, she was admiring the boy himself. Sakura could swear she was almost drooling. In front of her seat was seated Temari and Kankuro. Sakura couldn't see their faces, but they looked as if they were gaping at the empty chalkboard blankly. And in the seat in front of theirs was Choji, eating chips from a poorly hidden bag inside of his rucksack. He looked around cheerfully. Sakura snorted at the image of her classmates. Honestly, they were a bunch of idiots. After school, Sakura didn't go home, but went to the supermarket. It was Wednesday, and on Wednesdays, she had to work there to gain some money. On Thursdays, she babysat the Jones kids. On Fridays she just went grocery shopping and jogging. On Saturdays she also worked in the supermarket. On Sundays she made her homework. On Mondays she babysat the Smith's daughter. And on Tuesdays she made as much homework as she could, so she could gain money the rest of the week. She was a good student, so even when she didn't do as much for school, her grades were better than those of an average student. Sakura was swinging her bag back and forth cheerfully, humming her favorite tune. She was practically skipping down the road. The whole day, everybody had treated her normal. Of course, she still didn't have any friends, but everybody had treated her just like any other student. She smiled, barely believing it herself. The distance between her school and the supermarket was bridged in only minutes. The automatic doors opened for the girl, inviting her in. "Hello, Mr. Stevens. How was your day?" Sakura chirped at her boss. He was standing next to the door, holding a clipboard and overlooking the shop as if he overruled it. She got nothing but a disapproving look from the strict man before he wrote something down on the clipboard, but she didn't care. She just shrugged and walked over to an empty counter. The supermarket was very big, so when you entered it, you didn't walk straight into the part of the shop where the shelves with products were, but you had to pass the many counters first. As Sakura sat down behind the counter that wore the number 4. People that were standing in the back of lines in front of other counters immediately approached her, so a line was formed in front of hers. At the end of the evening, she took the bus home. She had learned from the last time. When she came home, she did her daily routine of cooking dinner, asking her mother whether she would like to eat dinner with her, receiving a "no, go away" for a reply from the woman, eating it by herself, doing the dishes, making her homework, reading a book, closing up the doors, windows and curtains and going to bed. After today, nothing could worsen her mood. She felt great. If anyone would have entered her room, they would have smiled at the girl, for she had fallen asleep with a broad smile plastered on her face. She believed you. Sasuke snorted at his friend. I'm not sure, but I know that if I hang out with her long enough, she'll trust me. Naruto laughed. Well, then do so. The moment she really trusts you, that's the moment she'll be the most frail. Ino said. The three of them were Skyping. Ino was talking through her cell phone, holding it in place between her cheek and her shoulder by bringing up her shoulder as high as she could without crushing her cell phone on the spot. She was painting her toenails a flirtatious raspberry pink. Sasuke was sitting behind his desk, resting his head on his hand. He was concentrating on his math homework. Naruto was sitting on his roof, with his laptop resting on his lap. His parents had died when he was just a baby, so he was now living by himself. He lived in a small, dusty, stuffed apartment. He never liked his apartment, so he vowed to spend as few time there as possible. Luckily, it was on the upper level, so when he stood on his balcony, he only had to climb up the rain pipe before he was on top of the roof, his favorite spot by far. He could see the whole town. The breathtaking sunsets and sunrises, the large amount of stars that were in the sky at night, the tiny dots that were people, way down on the streets. So what do you want me to do? He asked his friends through the phone. Befriend her, of course. Came Ino's reply, and, when she trusts you with her whole heart, tell her the truth. I dunno, laugh at her or something. That'll teach her. Okay. Sakura is so naive. It probably won't take long before she confides in you. Ino said, a small smile curling the corners of her lips. Sasuke tried his best to look bored as always, but Naruto could see the excited glint in his eyes, even on the small screen. Gotta go, you guys. I'll see you on school tomorrow. Naruto said, closing up the laptop before giving his friends the chance to reply. He sighed and closed his eyes, before casting a glance at the star-lit sky. He lay down, intending on closing his eyes for only a second. Before he knew it, he was lured into a deep slumber. You don't know why, but for some reason, Naruto had a creative mind. He thought about many strange, happy and sometimes just plain stupid things. He knew what words, colors and notes to use to make them live on forever. Well, forever was a bit exaggerated, of course. Forever doesn't exist. Forever is only said by people that don't think of the true meaning of the word. Forever is a terribly long time. It means, from now until the rest of eternity. In fact, when somebody says the word, forever, they are lying already. Forever goes beyond death, and we, as human beings, don't go beyond death. Nobody goes beyond death. No living creature, anyways. See, he was doing it again, getting lost in his own, endless line of useless thoughts. There were people that didn't think he thought this much. In truth, the opposite was going on. He thought so much that his thoughts made him dizzy. If he was a writer, he would write them down. If he was an artist, he would draw them out. Heck, if he was a singer, he would make them into a beautiful, heart-wrenching symphony. Opening parenthesis. You know, one of these symphonies you hear when you are bored and turn on the radio. You have no idea what the song is called. All you know is that it was amazing, and that you want to hear it again. But yeah, he couldn't do any of these things, so he just stuck to thinking. In truth, the things he thought were very deep. He could probably become famous when he knew how to make them into words. But when he did, They sounded weird. Who knows, maybe somebody could make it into a story. One of these stories that fathers tell their sons. Stories with morals and depth. Stories that seem to pierce your soul. Maybe he should tell a writer about his thoughts. That person could make it sound right outside of his head as well. But then again, things like that were probably expensive. Perhaps it was better if Naruto kept his thoughts to himself. That way he was the only one to enjoy them. Although, was he selfish? Was he selfish for wanting to keep these wonderful, amazing thoughts to himself? To save them for one of these rare moments that he was so bored that he had nothing to do but enjoy his own thoughts. Bam! Naruto's head snapped up from his wooden table when a loud banging noise filled his ears. He looked straight into the face of their English teacher, Ms. Anko. She had slammed his table with a book, and was now looking at him with her eyes narrowed and a satanic smirk plastered on her face. Well, well, Naruto, is my class so boring that you decide you'd rather sleep? I wasn't asleep, technically, Naruto muttered, resting his head on his handpalm. Soft chuckling could be heard from his classmates. Anko flicked her eyes over to the students and the sounds faded instantly. Tisk, Naruto thought, smirking to himself. Anko turned her back to the class and walked up to the chalkboard. Uzumaki, 1 hour of detention after school. Naruto's jaw dropped. What? I didn't do a thing. He dismissed the fact that this was probably the problem. The trick is, when a teacher punishes you in class, to always pretend you didn't do anything wrong. Even when you did. Some teachers tend to give you a second chance when you tell them this. Uzumaki, 2 hours of detention after school. Too bad Anko wasn't one of these teachers. Naruto furrowed his brows and pouted at the raven-haired teacher's back. When the bell rung, Naruto's classmates immediately started chattering. They gathered their stuff and walked out of the classroom. When Ino and Sasuke passed Naruto's seat, they both smiled at him encouragingly, knowing the plan was that their friend would walk home with Sakura this afternoon. English was their last period on Friday, so weekend had just begun. Naruto grinned a toothy smile at his friends before turning around and scanning the classroom for the pink hair, pale skin and scrawny body that belonged to Sakura Haruno, only to find her seat was empty. Had she walked past him without him noticing? He looked around. The classroom was deserted. He sighed, and exited the classroom, approaching his locker. As he put on his orange and black hoodie and plugged the tiny earplugs from his iPod into his ears, he couldn't help but steal a glance at the small groups of students that were still inside the building. The biggest part of the teenagers had already gone outside. Knowing them, they were all heading for the center of town to get ice cream, clothes and other things that they didn't really need, but just loved to buy. Each and every one of the students that went to Konoha High lived for these Friday afternoons. In the whole week, no afternoon gave the teenagers such a free feeling like the Friday afternoon did. The school week had just passed, and Monday was still 2 days away. His friends were probably having fun now, as well. Oh, how Naruto would have loved to join them, but instead he had to search for Billboard Brow Haruno. Well, now at least she would get what she deserved. With that thought, Naruto slammed his locker shut and walked towards the red doors that separated the hallway from the green, colorful schoolyard. Opening up the doors with ease, Naruto seized his cell phone from the front pocket of his jeans. The soft beep coming from the device let him know that somebody had just sent him a new text message. Hi, having fun with BBB. CYAL8 he read. The text message came from Ino. BBB meant Billboard Brow, obviously. She's nowhere to be found. Naruto texted back, before putting his cell phone back in his pocket and continuing on his way to his scooter. Meanwhile, on the other side of the school, there was a skinny, pink-haired girl crouching beside the flower beds. She was bathing in the bright afternoon sunlight, only enshadowed by birds that flew over the schoolyard, chirping happily and looking down on the beautiful garden underneath them. The girl smiled up at him, letting her emerald-colored eyes sparkle in the sunlight. Sakura did that on many afternoons. When all other students were gone, she stayed a little longer, enjoying the lush school garden and the gorgeous flowers that adorned it. She loved being in gardens, as you probably already knew. Well, time to go home, she thought, shooting the flowers one last glance before picking up her bag and walking through the school doors. She marched through the deserted hallways, her stride brisk and her expression stern. Sakura normally didn't walk this quickly, but the deserted hallways gave her the creeps. She just kept walking towards the main school doors, her gaze fixed on the light peeping in through the small balustered windows, leaving light yellow stripes on the linoleum floor. All of a sudden, Sakura felt trapped. The round glass windows in the doors of the many classrooms seemed as if they were eyes, eager to watch the girl's every movement, and the cool air that came from the fans that were attached to the ceiling sounded like shallow breathing. Sakura looked around swiftly, shooting every dark corner in the hallways a suspicious glance. She closed her eyes, her breathing quickening. She was beginning to hyperventilate. Sakura knew there was nothing here to be afraid of, she was sure of it. But ever since her little adventure in the alleyways in town, just being alone creeped her out. She started walking even faster, turning her head to look at every suspicious thing in the hallway so quickly that she lost her footing and stumbled forward. Luckily, this fall caused the girl to hit the door and tumble outside, into the sun and the muggy afternoon air. Before she knew it, she landed face first on the stone steps in front of the main doors. Wondering what the fuss was about, Naruto removed his earplugs from his ears and turned his head into the direction of the school. He immediately arched an eyebrow at the image of Sakura lying on the steps, panting as if chased by the devil. He placed his scooter against the iron fence and took off towards the main doors. Sakura looked up when she heard footsteps approaching, so blinded by the intense sunlight that she didn't recognize who the person that was running towards her at first. That was, of course, until she heard his all too familiar voice, Sakura. What are you doing down there? Sunbathing, she replied sarcastically, sitting up and rubbing her sore nose. Naruto arched an eyebrow at the girl. What gave her the right to make a sarcastic comment at him? He didn't give in to his astonishment, though. What made you trip? Oh, I was just clumsy, is all, Sakura muttered, her voice muffled by her hand. Naruto rolled his eyes at the pinkett as she stood up. For a moment, he thought he noticed her trembling slightly, but dismissed it. Shouldn't you be in detention? Sakura asked him. Yeah, Naruto snickered, so. Sakura opened her mouth, closed it and then opened it again, like a fish gulping for air. He didn't go to detention, even though Ms. Anko told him to. He must be insane. So, wanna get something to drink? He asked her bluntly. Sakura turned her head in his direction, her eyes widened and her mouth hanging agape. What? Something to drink, Naruto repeated slowly. Sakura looked down at her feet so her face was hidden by bubblegum pink strands of hair, protecting her from the blonde's view. She still wasn't sure whether she could trust him. No matter how friendly he acted towards her lately, he had bullied her. He had bullied her so terribly that she had even thought of suicide once or twice. People couldn't change like this, could they? Not in such a short time, anyway. She looked up when she heard shuffling from behind her, but then noticed it was coming from Naruto. He was now leaning against the side of the school building with closed eyes, enjoying the warmth from the sunlight and concentrating on each and every sound around him. The chirping of the birds, the distant sounds of the cars, the clattering from the nearby fountain, the wind playing with the grass and the trees and even the slight shrieking coming from the iron fence as the breeze brushed past it, pushing it back and forth in the process. It was a way of meditation his uncle, Jiraiya, had taught him to calm down when he wanted to. Jiraiya wasn't Naruto's actual uncle, but he was the only adult that really looked after him. He paid the rent for his apartment and had been his father's best friend. He must really like the sun, huh? Sakura thought, staring at the boy in wonder. Stop staring at me, he ordered without opening his eyes. Sakura turned her head back so she was now facing the fence that separated the school grounds from the main road again. I wasn't From behind her back, Naruto opened one eye and curled the right corner of his mouth up in a smirk. Yes, you were. He then pushed himself off the wall and walked up to Sakura. So, are you coming or not? When after a few minutes Sakura still hadn't answered him, he poked her in the shoulder. Are you? There was no escaping this guy, was there? Fine, Sakura muttered. About half an hour later they were both sitting on top of the roof above Naruto's apartment, their legs dangling from the roof gutter and a can of Coke in their hands. The building wasn't located that far away from Konoha High, so the ride they took had been a short but very awkward one. The reason it had been uncomfortable was that, since Sakura didn't have a bike, she hadn't had any choice but riding with Naruto on his scooter with her arms secured tightly around his stomach. Naruto leaned back with closed eyes, softly landing on his back. Meanwhile, a safe distance away from him, Sakura was reading a book, now and then taking a sip from her Coke. Naruto opened his eyes when he heard the soft ruffling of paper. He propped himself up on one elbow, gazing at Sakura. She didn't look up. She was completely absorbed by whatever it was. Not able to suppress his nosy nature, he sat up and crawled over to the place where the girl was sitting. He was surprised when she still didn't look up. Her face was so close to the page she was reading that her nose was pressed against the paper. Naruto smirked. He could not let this chance go by. He brought his mouth close to her right ear and then yelled, "Hey! What are you reading?" Sakura shrieked and heaved her arms up, causing the book to fly up in the air. She shot Naruto a shocked look before frantically reaching out for the book, trying to grab it before it fell down from the roof, into the depth that was the busy street. Just in time her fingers closed around the object and pulled it back. Hugging the book as tightly as she could, she narrowed her eyes at Naruto, who was laughing maniacally. Don't ever do that again. What are you talking about? That was classic. He gasped between laughs, still clenching his stomach. Sakura crossed her arms with a pout. She understood why he thought it was so funny. This was one of those things that are hilarious, until it happens to you. When after a few minutes Naruto's laughter had finally faded, he wiped away the happy tears that had been streaming over his cheeks and managed to ask her, "So, what book are you reading?" She loosened her grip on the book so she could look at the cover. She gently traced the two people on the cover with her finger. "Pride and Prejudice," she whispered. "Pride and Prejudice," Naruto repeated, seemingly uninterested. "Yes, it is my favorite. I dunno. I mean, the story is so deep. No, more like dramatic. That might be because it's meant to be dramatic. It's called drama, for a reason, you know," she said, pointing at the small label on the first page of the book. Naruto pursed his lips. He hated people treating him as if he was stupid. He shot the pink at a glare from the corners of his eyes. Her arrogance was another reason why he despised Sakura so. "I love this book. It has a great moral, an amazing script. It is like a piece of art," Sakura sighed. "You like art?" Naruto questioned, looking back at the girl with sudden interest. "Well, I like looking at art. I just don't know much about it," she admitted. "You should take a look at this," Naruto exclaimed, searching through his bag until he found what he was looking for. It was a small, cheap-looking book with a plastic cover. Sakura arched an eyebrow at him. Was he kidding her? He held it out to Sakura, and the pinkett hesitatingly accepted it. She stroked the cover like she had with Pride and Prejudice. This book didn't feel old or mysterious like her favorite book, though. It felt new and cheap. "Klimt," she read. "What is it?" she asked Naruto, flipping through the pages. "It's a collection of Gustav Klimt's artworks." "Who?" Naruto gasped. "Don't tell me you've never heard of Gustav Klimt." "Who is he, then?" "Only the most gifted artist in the existence of humanity." As she looked at the drawings, sketches and paintings, she had to admit his work was one of the most impressive collections she had ever seen. Not all of her attention was on the book, though. She was mainly thinking about how strange it was that she hadn't known anything about Naruto's interest in art. She had known him practically her whole life. Well, of course she hadn't been very close with him. But still. Although, now that she thought about it, he was a straight A student when it came to drawing class. So, what do you think? Naruto asked her, unknowingly breaking her chain of thoughts. Amazing, Sakura whispered, giving him back the book. He shook his head at her though. Keep it. I already have 3 of them, he said, taking a sip from his can and wiping his mouth with his sleeve. Really? Thanks, she muttered. Hey, Naruto said, leaning over the edge of the roof, isn't that Danzo? Danzo. Janitor Danzo? Sakura asked, leaning over the edge as well. He gave me detention last week, only because I was walking in the same hallway where he was mopping the floor. Is he even allowed to? Dunno. I didn't go. Sakura suppressed the urge to shake her head in disapproval. Watch this, Naruto said. The wide, devious smirk spreading on his face made the pink-haired girl sitting beside him anxious, but the curious part of her made her stay put even when he reached out for a bucket that was standing behind him, against the chimney. He snickered, taking a hold of the iron grip, seizing it from its spot, and grabbing it tightly with both of his hands. Sakura wondered what was inside of the bucket. Judging from the tightened muscles that were visible underneath the tight, black dress shirt the blonde was wearing, it was pretty heavy. Then, without giving Sakura time to do as much as say, stop, Naruto dropped the content of the bucket over the man walking by. This content, Sakura noticed, was water. In less than 2 seconds, the words, "What the fuck?" echoed across town so loudly that even the birds that had been sitting in the many trees in a nearby park flew up in the air. Naruto and Sakura were silent for a few seconds, until they slowly turned to look at each other and burst out laughing. Later that afternoon, when Sakura was walking home with a big, carton grocery bag in her arms, she overthought the events that had occurred that day. She couldn't believe Naruto had made her laugh at such an insolent and inappropriate thing. Laughing at a man that had had a bucket of water landing on top of him was so unlike her. It was unlike who she was now, anyway. Not only that, but also the fact that Naruto had wanted her to come to his house. She hadn't trusted it. In fact, she had brought pepper spray in her bag, and had an iron grip on it the whole ride back and traveled to the roof of the building. She had expected all of this to be some kind of ultimate bully plan. Does he really want to be my friend? Sakura thought, crossing the road carefully. All of this just doesn't make sense. Why would he want to? And why now? Sakura bit her lip. Should she let Naruto become her friend? Should she? A few minutes later Sakura walked up the front porch and the stone steps that led to her house and unlocked the front door. She wished he would just leave her alone. Just days ago, everything had been fine. Okay, so she had been lonely, and a little bit broken. But at least there hadn't been a need to fear to lose something. Even when the only reason for that was that she did not have anything to begin with. Sakura entered the kitchen, switched on the lights and put the bag that carried her groceries on the kitchen table. She looked inside of the bag. Looks like today's dinner will consist of tomato soup and slices of cucumber, she thought, pulling out a big cucumber and a carton box that contained soup for 2 persons. She put a pan on the stove, tore open the box, added the content to the pan and poured water over the soup. She stirred the soup for a few minutes, added salt and, when it tasted to her liking, moved over to a place on the sink a few feet to the right and minced the cucumber into thin slices. She looked up from the cucumber when she noticed the soup was giving off a not-so-faint scent and reached up to the cooker hood. She switched it on, but, when there was no air sucked into, or sound coming from the machine, reached out to the window next to it instead. The Pinkett opened it slightly, walked over to the kitchen table, scribbled a note to herself, "Don't forget, cooker hood broken. Call someone to come fix it," and continued mincing. Only to be distracted again by a complaining mew coming from somewhere below her. Looking down, she spotted Primrose sitting on the kitchen tiles. "I wish I had somebody to go to for advice," Sakura whispered as she crouched down and petted the white-coated kitten. The cat tilted its head, widening its big yellow eyes even more. Sakura giggled. Talking to a cat didn't mean she was crazy, she wouldn't have to worry until the cat started talking back. She opened a cupboard, took out a bag of cat feeds and filled the cat's iron food bowl with the brown chunks. She got up and finished cooking dinner. The pinkett took one bowl of tomato soup and a small plate of cucumber slices and took it to her mother. As always, the woman didn't do anything but giving her a small grunt when her daughter put down her meal on the table next to her armchair and whispered, "Come on, Mom. Eat. It will make you feel better." When after a few minutes still no sounds came from the woman, Sakura sighed and left the room. She felt lonely, eating her dinner in the semi-darkness that was the kitchen all by herself, but she didn't have a choice, complaining wouldn't help. Sakura sighed. She reached out for her bag and pulled it towards her. After about 2 seconds of searching it, she found what she was looking for. She opened the small book with the name, Klimt, on the cover and started looking at the artworks inside perceptively. She understood why Naruto liked it so much. There were so many paintings, and each one was totally different from the previous one. It was unbelievable to imagine how every painting was made by the same artist. At the same time that Sakura was eating dinner, there was a blonde teenage boy leaning against a chimney on the roof above Naruto's apartment, the only source of light coming from the flashlight in his hand. He had been sitting there like that for hours. As soon as he returned from the library, he had settled himself against the stone chimney and started reading. He actually enjoyed the book. It wasn't cheesy like he thought it would be, and the dialogues required him to stay focused. Well, it was still pretty much of a girl's book, but none of his friends needed to know he was reading it. He looked up at the star-lit sky. He adored nights like this one. It had been a hot day, so the air was still warm even on top of such an enormous building. There were no clouds to be seen, so the view of the sky and the skyline of Konoha was entrancing. And of course it was a Friday, meaning Naruto wouldn't have to worry about school. A shiver ran up his spine as a cold breeze brushed against the skin of his neck, face, hands and his bare feet. Naruto put on his hoodie again. It was getting really chilly outside now. Naruto's eyes again trailed back to the book in his hands. Naruto ran a hand through his blonde spikes. He didn't really understand why exactly he had decided to borrow Pride and Prejudice in the first place. The story hadn't interested him in the least, and the words Forehead had used to describe it didn't make him curious for the content of the book at all. It wasn't like Naruto wanted to know what made her this interested in a book. He hated her after all. Yes, he hated her. He hated the freakish, hideous, idiotic and arrogant pink-haired girl with all his heart. He had left each and every feeling of hope, friendship and love for Sakura Haruno behind a long time ago. All that had remained was hate. Sakura woke up to the increasing volume and rapidity of raindrops tapping on the windows of her bedroom. Her eyelids fluttered open, but she noticed that there wasn't much difference in the intensity of the light. It was still dark. She turned on her stomach with a grunt. According to her alarm clock, it was 11 a.m. already, even though it did not look like it right now. She pulled the covers over her head again, moaning in the process. And that damn weatherman said it was going to be sunny today. Bastard. Reluctantly, Sakura rolled out of bed, left her room and walked over to the bathroom for a short shower. As she undressed, entered the shower cabin and turned on the warm water button, she found there was no warm liquid pouring out of the shower rose. No, the liquid that poured out was icy cold. Sakura squealed and jumped back, for a moment forgetting that there was nothing there but a shower curtain. She instinctively grabbed a hold of the wet piece of fabric, accidentally ripping it off of the iron bar it had been hanging from just seconds ago, and tumbled backwards. With a loud yelp, the pink-haired girl landed on the stone tiles, tangled in the shower curtain. Trembling, she untangled the shower curtain from her body. She got up and turned the shower off, grabbed a towel from the iron towel rack and wrapped it around herself. Just my luck, Sakura muttered through clenched teeth. She averted her gaze to the shower again. The water boiler is probably broke, she figured, shivering. Sakura left the bathroom and walked into her bedroom. She dressed herself in a pair of white hot pants, a somewhat long pink tank top and a red, short-sleeved vest that stopped just above her waist. It was too small for her, but her parents had bought it as a present for her 9th birthday, so she had many good memories of it. Memories in which things weren't this messed up. She slipped on her favorite all-stars and walked downstairs. She didn't feel any need to open up the curtains in the living room, since the darkness outside didn't differ from the darkness inside very much. When she walked into the kitchen and looked at the clock, she noticed it was 11:30 already. Holy crap, she thought, stuffing a slice of bread in her mouth, I have to be at work at 12 o'clock. The Pinkett grabbed an apple and walked out of the kitchen. When she searched the coat rack for her jacket, she noticed it was gone. Mentally, she smacked herself, I must have forgotten it at Naruto's place. But she had to go to work, and so she opened the door and walked outside. She was immediately carried off of her feet by a sudden strong breeze and an avalanche of cold raindrops. Sakura shivered for the umpteenth time this morning and hugged her almost bare arms around herself. Luckily her vest did have a hood. She looked up at the gray clouds and flinched as a crooked line of lightning filled the sky, followed by seconds of roaring thunder. Without even thinking twice she started sprinting, and she didn't stop until she was inside of the supermarket. The Pinkett wrung her hair out with her hands, earning a disapproving, MMMH. From her boss. He was swiftly making his way over to the girl, towering over her. Haruno, you are not paid to besmirch this floor with rainwater, he barked. I'm sorry, Mr. Stevens, Sakura said, after flicking her hair over her shoulder one more time, accidentally, wetting the middle-aged man in the process. She walked over to a cash desk and sat down. After a few hours of just sitting and waiting for customers to come, suddenly a little girl approached the cash desk with a stuffed shopping basket. She lifted it up and put it on the desk, pretending she could carry it without any difficulty. The concentrated look on her small face revealed the opposite was going on, though. Hello, Hanabi, Sakura said, smiling. The girl looked up with her big, lavender-colored eyes and brushed a strand of raven hair out of her face. Hi, Sakura. Hanabi was Hinata's little sister and looked just like her with her pale skin and hair that was so black that it almost looked midnight blue. Sakura used to babysit her, and even now they ran into each other often since one of Hanabi's chores was grocery shopping. Sakura, are you alright? The little girl asked Sakura as the Pinkett moved Hanabi's groceries through the laser. Sakura looked up. Of course, why are you asking? You're shivering all over. You look like you caught a cold, Hanabi said, putting her groceries in the shopping bag she brought and handing Sakura the money that was needed. Don't be silly, Sakura said, taking the money with a smile on her face. I'm fine. That sentence lost some of its credibility, though, when Sakura sneezed loudly. Hanabi raised an eyebrow at her. You sure? Yes, Sakura said, giving the young girl a small wave. Okay then, Hanabi muttered before waving at Sakura, turning away from her and leaving the shop. Sakura looked around and scanned the supermarket for anybody that was looking at her. She slowly touched her forehead with her hand. I do feel kind of warm, though. But Sakura could not be sick. If she was sick, she wouldn't be able to gain money. Her mother depended on her, whether she appreciated her daughter's hard work or not. About half an hour later, Sakura noticed her head was hurting a little. She looked around. At the moment, there was not a single customer in the entire shop. Of course there wasn't. Who would go out in this stormy weather? Well, Hanabi, of course, but her and Hinata's parents were very strict. That was the reason she ran her errands each and every Saturday, whether it was sunny, raining or there was a 4 feet thick layer of snow. With a soft moan, Sakura rested her head on the cool, iron cash desk. That felt better. She didn't know how long she had been laying there when somebody poked her in the shoulder, Sakura, are you alive? Sakura lifted her head up, and looked straight into the face of one of her colleagues. Yes, I'm fine. What is it? She blinked when she noticed her vision was a bit blurry. It's 5 o'clock. We can go home. Oh, right, Sakura muttered, rubbing her temples in a fruitless attempt to stop the pain her headache was giving her. Thanks for telling me. Have a nice weekend. Yeah, the girl said before turning away from Sakura and walking out through the sliding doors. Through the glass, Sakura saw her flinching at the heavy rainfall, opening up her umbrella and walking to the right, disappearing out of sight. The Pinkett sighed, rubbed her eyes and clumsily got up. When she passed a window on her way to the door and caught a glimpse of her reflection, she sighed. Her hair was standing on its ends and she looked as if she had just survived a tornado. She was almost happy her vision wasn't at its best. The teenage girl muffled a cough behind her hand. Sighing, she walked through the doors and into the horrible weather. She pulled the hood from her vest further over her head, but it didn't help. The rainwater soaked the hood so badly that her hair got wet anyway. It looked like the rainfall was even worse from how it had been that morning. She thought of sprinting like she had earlier that day, but when she tried, she had only been sprinting about 2 feet when she lost her footing and crashed into a garbage can. Groggily, she crawled away from the garbage can and got onto her feet. Sprinting hadn't been such a good idea. She clenched her hood as a sudden breeze tugged at her hair and tried pulling the fabric from her head. Okay, let's walk. Let's just walk, the soaked girl thought as she wobbly made her way through the street. But her head ached so much. And she was so cold. And her vision was so blurred. And her feet hurt. And she was so wet. Sakura, a voice called out to her all of a sudden, carried by the wind. Is that you, God? Sakura muttered, trying to make out the more than just the silhouette of the person standing quite a distance away from her, on the wet pavement. What are you talking about? Hey, Sakura. Are you alright, Sakura? The person yelled panicky. But Sakura couldn't concentrate. Her head ached and her eyelids drooped. Her skin felt so cold, and the raindrops cut into her flesh like tiny needles. That was about the moment everything went black. Warmth. That was the first thing that ran through Sakura's head as she gained consciousness. Where am I? She muttered. She wasn't outside anymore, that was certain. Covering her was something soft and warm. Am I dead? No, she couldn't be. She hadn't opened her eyes yet, but she could tell that wherever she was, it was too dark to be heaven. Or hell for that matter. Her eyelids fluttered open, and she looked straight into the face of her homeroom teacher. Arg, Mr. Kakashi, she screamed, crawling away from the face with as much speed as she could muster having just woken up. Too bad she had been lying on a bed, resulting in the girl now falling flat on her face on the wooden floor. Still panic-stricken, she blindly crawled further, now and then almost losing her balance because of the objects that were scattered all over the room. She clenched her forehead. Moving so recklessly it was only natural she bumped her head against a drawer. Arg, Mr. Kakashi. Thud. Naruto looked up from the magazine he was reading. Was Sakura awake already? Clang. Ouch. Damn you, world. Why do you hate me so? Naruto's sweat dropped. Yep, she was awake. Reluctantly, he stood up and made his way over to his bedroom. As he opened the door and took in the messy room, he immediately spotted Sakura lying on the floor. She was partly sitting up, her back resting against the wooden drawer, her hands were clenching her forehead and the back of her head, and her legs were spread out in front of her. She was still wearing her clothes she had been wearing when she had fainted in front of him earlier that afternoon. The only thing he had dared to take off was the red jacket she had worn. He had been too scared she would wake up and think he was raping her. You alright? He asked her awkwardly, not moving away from his spot in the doorway. She peeked up through the bangs that normally covered her eyes. Naruto. Where am I? Is this your bedroom? Did you help me? She stuttered, seemingly stunned. Naruto pursed his lips. Is me helping somebody this hard to believe? Do you really want to know the answer to that question? Sakura asked him. Naruto smirked. Nah, not really. Sakura also felt the corners of her mouth tugging up in a smile. The smile was kind of crooked because she felt sick and because the back of her head and her forehead hurt as a result of her reckless attempt to get away from her homeroom teacher. That reminded her. She looked up at the bed, looking for any sign of Mr. Kakashi. Again, she saw his face lying there, partly hid behind the pillows. She flinched, pointing towards the bed. Nah, Naruto. What is our teacher doing in your bedroom? Her question sounded more like a statement. Naruto followed the direction of her index finger. He snickered and walked up to the bed. Sakura's eyes widened as the blonde pulled out a big plushie from behind the pillows. Do you mean this teacher? ... It was a plushie. A fucking plushie. Yeah. She felt pretty stupid at that moment. Do I want to know why you own a plushie that looks like Mr. Kakashi? Sakura asked Naruto, not tearing her eyes away from the object in his hands. I don't remember, actually. I believe my dad once bought it for me. Sakura was silent for a while. They sell these things. What were you doing outside, anyway? You weren't even wearing a raincoat, Naruto said, placing the plushie back on the bed. I forgot my jacket at your place, didn't I? Yes, and I was coming to bring it to you at the supermarket. I didn't expect you to go outside without a coat. I was in a hurry this morning. Why didn't you just wear somebody else's jacket? Your mom's or your dad's? They were wearing the other coats themselves, Sakura lied. Naruto had been nice to her lately, very nice. But she couldn't help but not trusting him entirely, yet. She would tell him the truth later. She slowly got up, flinching when a flash of pain seemed to cut through her flesh. Hey, be careful, Naruto shouted, supporting her back. You have a fever, you idiot. Don't just stand up like that. He helped her as she stumbled towards the bed and lied down once again. He covered her with the sheet that had slipped off of her when she had frantically crawled out of bed and sat down on the side of the bed. Just stay here for the night, okay? Hey, Naruto, she whispered. He turned his head to look at her. What is it? What time is it? It's 7 o'clock, he said. He suddenly remembered he hadn't let her know anything about her parents. She had to be worried about them not knowing where she was. I looked up your telephone number in the phone book, but nobody answered the phone at your house. That's okay. They probably aren't very worried. Her eyelids drooped. Hey, Naruto. What? Thanks for everything. The blonde furrowed his brows and turned his head away from her. It's okay, he muttered, ignoring the heat rushing to his cheeks. He looked down at the girl's emotionless, sleeping face. Why had he helped her in the first place? He had wanted to bring her that jacket to get her to trust him, but why had he picked her up when she fainted? What had brought him to carry her all the way to his house? He could have warned somebody in the supermarket and left her there. He could have done all kinds of things that had been easier and more logical, so why? Why had he? His thoughts were interrupted by the ringtone of his cell phone. He stood up and hurried out of the room, scared it might wake his guest up. Naruto talking, he said, annoyed with the person that had interrupted his thoughts like that. Hello Naruto, a high-pitched voice sang into its owner's cell phone. In the background chattering, yelling and laughing could be heard. Hey, Ino. What's up? Well, Sasuke, Shikamaru, Kiba, Hinata, Shino and me are at my place. Kiba brought some beer and it's really fun. You coming? Sure. I'm Kami. He paused. Sakura was in his apartment, and she had a fever. He couldn't leave her here by herself. Hello. You still there? Ino called out impatiently. Yeah, sorry. Ino. Sakura's here. Forehead. Ino mused, seriously. At your place. Aren't you taking this revenge thing a little too seriously? I mean, you wouldn't want your social life to suffer from it, right? Yeah, I know. I just want to make sure she really trusts me, you know. Well, alright. If that's what you want, she muttered. He could practically hear his other friends casting her confused glances. Bye, he said. He trudged over to the couch and plopped down. The blonde reached out one tanned hand and used it to turn on the television. Oprah Winfrey was on. He stared at the screen, but didn't actually pay attention to the program. The first reason was that he really didn't give a shit about the crying housewives that each had some dramatic story involving themselves and their husbands. The second reason was that he was tired as hell. Naruto's stomach growled. It wasn't until that moment that he noticed he was starving. He hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. He got up from the couch, not bothering to turn off the television, and strolled over to the kitchen. As he opened the cupboards, he noticed the entire cabinet was filled with nothing but instant ramen. He snickered at his own idiocy and grabbed a carton of ramen. He was about to close the cupboard when he thought of something. He grabbed a second one and then stood up to put them in the microwave. About 5 minutes later, he opened the door that led to his bedroom and walked up to the sleeping girl. He chuckled. She was sleeping in the exact same position he always did, the blanket nowhere to be found, her body lying on its side and the Kakashi plushie clasped between her arms and legs. "Hey," he said, "Sakura." The pink-haired girl grunted, released the plushie from the suffocating grasp she had on it and rolled over, now facing him. "What is it?" She slurred. "Eat," he ordered, holding one of the bowls of ramen he had prepared out to her. Sakura sat up, rubbing her eyes. Okay, thanks," she stuttered, noticing the bowl lingering inches away from her face. She stiffly grabbed it and put it down on her lap. The teen looked up just in time to see Naruto walk through the bedroom door and close it behind him. She blew a strand of pink hair out of her face, flabbergasted. Why would he first prepare dinner for her that she didn't even ask for, and then walk away as if he was pissed off for having to do it? She looked down at the bowl, letting the vapor coming from it warm her face up. She'd probably never understand guys. Especially not the blonde whose house she was crashing at that moment. Sakura ate the rest of her ramen slowly, and then slipped out of Naruto's bed for a toilet break. She tiptoed across the room, careful not to break anything. As quietly as she could, she opened the bedroom door and poked her head around the corner. She looked into a small hallway that led to a messy living room. There was a door in the right wall of the living room that Sakura assumed was a kitchen, and behind it there was another one that had a small sign hanging from it. It read the word, bathroom. From the living room, some sounds could be heard that were presumably coming from the television. After she was sure Naruto wasn't there, she hopped over to the bathroom. Halfway across the living room, though, she was startled by an orange speck she noticed from the corner of her eyes. Already heaving her arms up, ready to yelp that she was only going to the bathroom, she turned to the speck. She immediately lowered her arms. Naruto had sunk further in the sofa, his chin resting on the arm of the couch. His mouth was hanging open slightly, and he was snoring. He was clutching the empty bowl he had been eating ramen from in his hands. Sakura couldn't suppress a chuckle. After she went to the bathroom, she again passed Naruto. Once again her face turned towards him. She stopped in her tracks. He had taken care of her so well earlier that evening. She couldn't leave him lying there like that. She scanned the rest of the room for any sign of anything she could use as a blanket. The pinkett bit her lip. She didn't see anything, and so she tiptoed over to the bedroom and took the blanket from his bed. She walked back to the living room and took a few steps in Naruto's direction. She clumsily wiggled the bowl he was holding out of his grip and covered him with the blanket. She then picked up the black remote that was lying on the low, glass table and used it to turn off the television. When Sakura was lying in the bed again, she thought over the occurrences of that day. She was worried about her mom. What if she had had no dinner? What if the blanket had slipped off again? She was worried about all of the chores that were awaiting her at home. Hovering the stairs and hallways, working in the garden, cleaning the living room, calling somebody to repair the water boiler and the cooker hood, paying the bills. But mostly, her mind was on Naruto. Sakura rolled on her side. After 4 years of bullying, why would he be so nice all of a sudden? All of this just didn't make sense. Except, she thought, what if he feels sorry for bullying me? What if he wants to make it up to me? It could be possible. Maybe he hadn't noticed how much pain it had caused the girl until a week before. After all, pain lives inside, not outside. Yes, that was probably it. Sakura sneezed. Being ill sucks. When Sakura woke up the next morning, she felt disorientated. The room she had been sleeping in wasn't hers. She looked around groggily, trying to get a clear view of her surroundings. Her eyes widened. Everything came back to her. Had Naruto woken up already? Ignoring the dizziness that took over, she stumbled out of the bed and towards the door. Like she had done last evening, she slowly opened the door and scanned the hallway and the part of the living room that was visible for the blonde teen. She could see him walking into the kitchen, clad in new clothing. His hair was wet and stuck to his forehead. He looked as if he had just showered. He hadn't noticed her yet. Sakura walked back into the room and towards the mirror that hung above a cabinet. She looked at her reflection and, not entirely sure why, tried fixing her hair. When she found she looked a bit better, she swung open the bedroom door and walked into the living room. She walked over to the kitchen and tapped her knuckle against the wooden doorpost. "Good morning, Naruto." Naruto flinched and almost dropped whatever he was holding as he cast a glance over his shoulder. He turned back to the kitchen sink. "Yeah, hi." Neither of them said anything for a while. Sakura kept standing in the doorway, taking in the kitchen. "Sakura," Naruto said all of a sudden. Sakura looked back to Naruto. Yes." The blonde put what he had been holding on the kitchen sink and turned around. Sakura noticed he had been making a sandwich. A barrel of peanut butter stood on the stone sink, the plastic lid next to it as well as a knife. "You feeling better?" Yes I do. Thanks," Sakura said, not only for asking, but also for, taking me when I. "That's okay," he said, turning back to the sandwich. "Do you want some breakfast or something?" "Nah," Sakura said, "I think I should go home. Thanks for your hospitality." She turned away from the blonde. "Hostility," Naruto muttered. "Stop talking like an old man." Sakura pursed her lips. "I like talking like an old man, I guess. Better than talking like some kind of barbaric teenage R&B star," she thought. She didn't say that out loud, of course. "Could you tell me where my jacket is?" she asked after another short pause. "I put it on the heater underneath the window last night, so it could dry." Sakura looked back into the living room, which was hard, since the curtains were still closed there, and, indeed, noticed her red jacket draped over the heater. She walked over to the windows and pulled the curtains open. Her jaw dropped. It must have been very early, because the sun had only just climbed up until just above the skyscrapers in the distance. The rain had stopped. The sun was colored a light yellow. The clouds were underlined with gold, the sky behind it was fading from yellow, to orange, to pink, to an icy blue, and those colors were only emphasized by the morning mist that blurred them all together. She heard footsteps from behind her and knew Naruto was approaching. "You like it?" he asked her. Sakura could only nod. "It's amazing. I've never seen anything like it. During summer, I often fall asleep on the roof and get to see both the sunrise and the sunset from there. It's what I like the best. It must be amazing. Living in a place this high, I mean." "Yes, it is. Kind of lonely, though." Sakura kept silent. Telling him she was lonely as well didn't make sense. She had told him her parents loved each other and they loved their daughter as well. Although, in fact, she wasn't sure if they even wanted her as a daughter. Her father was gone and he wasn't coming back. Her mother was gone, too. Well, of course, her mother was still here. But she wasn't who she used to be. Sakura thought about all of this, trying to make him think she was still amazed by the sunrise. She bended over and grabbed her vest. Suddenly she remembered he still had her jacket. "Your other jacket is hanging from the housestand," he said, not taking his eyes away from the spectacle of colored splashes in the distance. It was like he could read her mind. Sakura nodded and turned back to the living room. She was surprised. It looked so different in the daylight. Of course, it was still a bit gray and empty, aside from the colored paintings and the surprisingly many books that were piled up high on each and every table and cabinet, but the light added a little more color. Sakura put on her vest, taking in the paintings. Her attention was attracted by a wooden painter's easel in the middle of the room. She peeked at Naruto from the corner of her eyes. He was still captivated by the beauty of the sunrise. Careful not to attract his attention, she tiptoed over to the painter's easel and looked at the painting on it. It was a picture of two people, each walking on one side of a young, blonde boy. They were all smiling, each holding an ice pop. The person on the left side of the boy was a blonde man with sapphire blue eyes, and the person on the right a woman with red hair that cascaded down her back. Sakura gulped. She felt as if she had invaded somebody's privacy. This painting looked too personal. She was sure she wasn't meant to see it. She took a few steps away from the painter's easel and called out, should go now. Thanks for everything. Without giving Naruto the chance to reply, she hopped over to the hallway, grabbed her jacket and walked through the door. Naruto turned away from the window and watched the pink-haired girl stumbling out of the room. She didn't even seem to notice she was bumping into things in the process. What a weirdo. The door slammed shut. He sighed. His eyes unwillingly went to the caramel-colored couch and the blanket that was draped over the elbow rest. He had noticed it this morning. He had woken up underneath a blanket he was sure had been on his bed the evening before. That selfless idiot, he had thought, smiling. But he hadn't been able to bring himself to thank her, being the proud person he was. He would do so some other time, he figured. He leaned back against the window. Everything was going well. That girl was coming to trust him more every day. Soon, everything would be alright. He could tell her the truth. She would be hurt and they would be even. He took out his cell phone from his pocket. You guys coming to my house later? He texted. He selected Sasuke and Ino as the receivers of the text message and sent it. It took only minutes for Ino to reply with a, sure. I'll be at place round 2 o'clock. You got a movie or something? X. Next came Sasuke's message, yes. It'd feel good to have some fun with his real friends. When Sakura came home, everything was just the way she expected it, dark and silent. She removed her shoes and put her jacket away. When she cast the back door a glance, she noticed there were tiny, muddy paw prints leading from the cat flap to the kitchen. Sakura giggled, until she remembered her cat hadn't gotten any food yesterday evening. She ran to the kitchen and found her cat sitting next to its food bowl, pushing it from right to left with its paw. It turned its head towards its owner, its eyes accusing. I'm sorry, Primrose, Sakura called out, pulling out the bag of cat food from a cabinet and putting a handful in the cat's iron bowl. The white cat mewed once before attacking the food. Sakura turned around and stretched her muscles. Still stretching, she walked over to the big windows and opened them up, closing her eyes to the fresh wind. The pinkett then turned away from the windows and prepared some food for her mother. Loaded with a heavy tray with a sandwich, a bowl with a fruit salad and a glass of orange juice on it, Sakura kicked open the kitchen door and wobbled over to the living room. Good morning, Mom, she said, forcing a smile for the miserable woman sitting in the chair. Sakura couldn't really make out anything in the darkness, so she first put down the tray on something that she assumed was a table and walked over to the windows. She opened the curtains and walked back to the tray. The pinkett closed her pale hands around it and carried it towards her mother. Look, Mom. I brought you some food. She put it on the coffee table before the fauteuil and sat down on the couch beside it. The red-haired woman still hadn't moved an inch. She looked worse. There were dark circles underneath her eyes, her cheeks looked hollow, her body looked even more skinny than the last time Sakura saw her. Her shoulder-length crimson hair had lost all of its glossiness and stuck in strands to her forehead. Sakura became worried. Was she even breathing? Yes, she was. If the pinkett concentrated, she could hear her mother's shallow breathing. Mom, Wake up, come on. You have to eat, Sakura said, poking her mother in the knee softly. She became worried. Mom. Come on. Sakura got to her feet and walked over to her mother. She shook her shoulders. Mom. Mom. The lean woman didn't move an inch. The pinkett didn't know what to do. Should she bring her to a doctor? But how? She didn't even have a bicycle. Sakura started trembling. She closed her eyes and tilted her chin up, taking big gulps of air. She had to keep herself from hyperventilating. She seized her cell phone from the pocket of her vest, hoping it still worked after the storm from yesterday. The light pink screen greeting her let her know that this was the case. Not knowing what else to do, she selected the only name in the list and pressed the green button.